Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. Recently, we saw the return of Butts to the Prime Minister's office. Nothing amazing about that. But then this return of the former advisor made me ruminate. And I find that the modern politicians, by and large, a majority of them, have lost the fine art of listening, and especially listening to a long-term advice. There are very few people, very few politicians who are like that. There was one Mrs. Gandhi in India. There was another one, Stephen Baker, here in Canada. There was one Roosevelt in USA, and Mr. Churchill, and of course Golda Meir. Now, ordinarily, we all assume that these leaders were strong-willed, had iron determination, and they did achieve what they wanted to do. But there's one fact which eludes people and rather escapes them, and that they had advisors who gave long-term advice, foresighted people. And those are the people who are not known. Those are the people who are absolutely anonymous. They're in the dark. And it is party hacks, advisors, short-term advisors, lobbyists, financial contributors, spinners, colleagues, and humble, self-serving polyester. And when people do meet flesh and blood folk, they talk. Unfortunately, the common trait of these people, most of the politicians, including our present Prime Minister, listens to are such people. And these people are basically profoundly short-term thinkers. Their vision does not extend beyond their nose. Their idea of the future in the present is the next question, period. The next by-election, the next news network interview, and at the most, the next general election. So, their advice can extend from half an hour to 5-year or 4-year period. They are not helpful in establishing the credentials of the political power or the political person as a statesman. And that's why such people who will be remembered long after their tenure are the people who build their countries, are those people who had dependable, capable, long-term strategies. Trump has that. Indira had that. Mr. Churchill had that. Roosevelt had that. But as I said, those are the people who don't brashly come in the news. They give their advice. The advice is acted upon and they fade quietly away. So, these aides which the political leaders have whisper in their ears and they can listen to the mighty idling of the massive engines, but the vibrations of the common people, the hopes and the aspiration of the common people, they escape these myopic advisors who call themselves strategists, advisors, chief of staff, and everything. As a matter of fact, if you look at their performance, apart from the elections, these are basically the salesmen of false hopes, and they indulge in power and optimism and the infinite capacity and credibility of the common people, the usual suspects, as I said earlier. Now, I remember reading somewhere that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, he has a very poor opinion of these short-term leaders. And he calls them plankton people. Good for photo, but not good for the meeting of the mind. And the politicians have lost that art of listening to the people who can give long-term views to transform them from politicians to statesmen. And that's a tragedy today. If you look at the poor work done by the PMOs anywhere, in majority of the countries, you would find the bold soul in the audience. And these are the people who don't do anything much except give such advice which will tempt them, help them cross the travails of the question period. But even there, they mumble only. They do not respond. And in my 70 plus years, because I've been watching this political spectre right from the age when I was 10 or 12. And then, I find that most of the time these people, with the rare exceptions, as I said earlier, because my first exposure was to Jawaharlal and Indira, was they were decisive. They didn't mumble, no, and I'm thinking. And Johar especially was to the point, incisive, and he never shied away from the question. Now the questions are there, and the answer hardly ever relates to the question. Hardly ever. They make their own statement which may have no relevance to the question at all. I remember reading and watching the videos put up by John Brassard, the Barry MP, asking very incisive questions, and the response by the Prime Minister was always that of a mumbling teenager who couldn't respond. So, if we look at the beginning of the civilization, the 10,000 years or so, you would find that the people who listen to the long-term advice, albeit those of practically anonymous people, were the people who gave such suggestions because they had no personal interest. The long-term strategists and advisors do not have personal interest. They are anonymous, as I said, so they don't get any credit. And because they don't get any discredit, they can afford to be blunt. And bluntness is required. If you have read a novel called Scientific Romance by Ronald Wright, you would see what I practically mean by it. And Ronald Wright, in the Scientific Romance, basically it should be a must-read book for all politicians because this is based on a short history of progress. A movie was made later more, made on this book, and the movie is called Surviving Progress. So if you want to bring the political system to its sense, then whatever the issue may be, whether it's global warming, climate change, overconsumption by the rich, gap between the poor and the rich, or the overpopulation by the poor, you would find that the politicians are going after a wrong type of progress. Please give. excuse me. So you would find these politicians listening to the short-term strategists who are just like old women talking ill of each other, having no sense at all. But they sound very profound. And that's what these advisors and the chiefs of staff are. What is basically needed is a technical will to take strong decisions. It needs an iron will to take right decisions. Could India have been combined into one country if Patel had not listened to VP Menon? Now all the credit for consolidation of India goes to Patel. But the real person who did, whose idea it was and who fortunately implemented it was VP Menon. Now if VP Menon had just advised and Patel had implemented it himself, nobody would have talked to about VP Menon. But since VP Menon was a bureaucrat and he had the capability of a long-term planning strategy, and Patel listened to him, so this duo achieved the virtual impossible task. And for the first time in history, India became a united country. It was a strong country earlier, but it was not united. There were 600 princely states, not sovereign, but under the suzerainty of the British, but they had their own law, their own custom and everything. There was not a cohesive law and order system. There was not one political system. So now these two people. And suppose VP Menon had just given the advice and Patel would have recommended it. Then VP Menon would have remained anonymous, unknown. But that would not have affected VP Menon. It would have not affected the whole process. The main thing is that they listen to it. Same is about another person, people don't even talk about it. They give credit to Jawaharlal Nehru for the 5-year plans. But the concept of 5-year plan was that not of Nehru. It was of Tarlok Singh, an economist, who gave that idea and quietly slipped into anonymity. The same was at later stages, where the ideas of some people, I am not going to name everybody, some should not be named because they are still alive, but then those people gave ideas, the political leaders acted on that and has changed the complete scenario, the political scenario, the social scenario, the cultural scenario. So, if you focus on a particular problem, for example, the NAFTA renegotiations, as a matter of fact, if a long-term strategist had been there, he would have told Trudeau just to tear up the agreement and learn to live on your terms. Have a bilateral agreement, and that I had suggested. But no, they spent more than 1.5 years talking nonsense and ultimately agreeing to whatever Trump wanted. So what was the benefit? As a matter of fact, the present government has no long-term goal here in Canada. In India, there were no long-term goals after Mrs. Gandhi died until Modi came to power. That was a period of stagnation, if not of downfall. That downfall was stemmed by Narasimha Rao. But after that, it again started stagnating. As a matter of fact, Pierre Trudeau had a much better, the father of president, advisor. He accepted the advice of Mr. King about multiculturalism and thus became a statesman, albeit I don't agree with that concept, but then that's a fact that the credit of multiculturalism goes to Trudeau, though the real person behind that was not Trudeau, but Mr. King. Why is this? That there's a declining respect for the politics and politicians. It's because they're out of tune with the people. And they're out of tune because of these short-term advisors. I call them political hacks. Excuse me. These political hacks, with the help of fake pollsters, create scenarios, and the political power flows away from politicians to the hands of these people. And the result is a disaster. So they plod on, they carried on. And most of the people have an illusory sense of well-being. It's not that. You know, the reality is proper husbanding of resources. And that is only possible if you think in the long-term perspective for the country, only when you think with your feet firmly planted on the earth and your eyes focused millions of miles away, if not light years. Now, let's not forget that politicians, if they want to be successful, have to be willing to identify good people who have long-term vision and then listen to that. And I was really so happy that in Sweden, they actually have a minister of the future in the government. One member of the cabinet dedicated to long-term thinking and long-term advice. That's the sort of the thing we need. The first person you remember was a 70-year-old woman, Christine Persson. 70-year-old when she was appointed cabinet minister for future. That's the sort of person we need. Well, think about it. And if you have political ambitions of not being a third-rate politician, but a first-rate statesman, whom people would remember and revere, who would be idolized, feted, and have all the laurels, have proper advice from long-term strategies. Are you listening? Would I ask the prime ministers and the presidents? Think about it, the people as well. See who surrounds your leader. And in case the people surrounding your leader are no good, then he is not fit to be your leader. Thank you.